This brief presentation is entitled The iPad and the State of the American Media Economy, or as I've alternately titled it, I've seen the future and it is covered in greasy fingerprints, which all of you who have played with the iPad know what I'm talking about. In fact, you know, in the first day that I played with the iPad, on the first day that it was available, I thought, boy, you know, Apple should really own this because it's such an integral part of the experience. Like, almost immediately becomes this kind of disgusting object, and then people say, oh, can I play with your iPad? And you're like wiping on your pants and trying to self-consciously get over the fact that it's covered with your germs. I think that Apple would do wise to co-venture with perhaps KFC with its double down sandwich. Just own the fact that you're greasy and disgusting. I was thinking about this, but then Gizmodo, the gadget blog, big gadget blog in New York, based in New York, actually did a video test of eating this sandwich, and playing with the iPad. And it completely disabled the iPad because it's just too disgustingly greasy. For those of you who are not familiar with this sandwich, it has 2 fried chicken fillets instead of the bread, and sandwiched between it, there's all kinds of disgusting American food. Anyway, I wanted to point out something here. Take a look at the tagline here. iPad is here. It's here. It's here. It's here. They are side together. And then KFC actually has a thing called the kids' laptop meal. If you look at the logo in the upper right-hand corner, there's this mania with kind of mobile computing. So now everybody has to act like their thing is a mobile computer or a mobile device as well. And if you look at this, it's marketed very similar to the iPad. Choose your chicken, choose your size, choose your drink and snacks. It's like choosing apps on your iPhone or your iPad. It's ridiculous. I thought a lot about the iPad in putting together a presentation for AdAge, for our AdAge Insights group, which produces a series of white papers. Dumenco State of the Media Report is basically the double-down sandwich of media reports. It's incredibly long, complicated look at the American media, where it stood in 2009 and where it's going. Good thing is that we are seeing some recovery. As I began work on this paper, the iPad had just been announced, and everybody in the New York media world in particular became obsessed with this idea that the iPad was going to suddenly change the world and save media. And suddenly we wanted a shift in the script from technology sort of taking a wrecking ball to everything in media to suddenly now Steve Jobs is going to save us somehow. I'm not sure if it's going to work out that way, but as a prelude to the panel discussion we're going to have about the iPad, I wanted to bring up 5 brief points, thoughts about the iPad. By the way, the white papers are available at this address. Advertising Age is a sponsor of this conference, so that's the extent of the infomercial that you get right there. Single most important thing to remember about iPad's launch is not this stuff, this Steve Jobs, magical, blah, 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 revolutionary, blah, blah, blah. Somebody did a video mashup of all the times that the Apple people, including Steve Jobs, said magical on the day of launch, and it was something like 200 times. Magical, 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 magical. That's all people can say. And of course it is magical when you first play around with it. But as a revolutionary media device, it remains to be seen. So beyond the rhetoric, I think the most important thing that was stated on that date was this. This is direct from Steve Jobs, the 125 million number. Steve said, we have over 125 million accounts with credit cards all enabled for one-click shopping on all these stores. And the stores he was talking about, of course, were the app stores, iTunes, now there's an iBook store, etc. Steve Jobs is a very smart guy. He's obsessed with the idea of owning this relationship with the consumer. Certainly there's Apple fanatics who feel very intimately connected to the Apple brand. But what's happening here is you're seeing Steve Jobs becoming this intermediary. And if you're a media person, you're used to the idea that you own that relationship with your customer. If you were in newspaper publishing, not only did you know where your customer lived, but you literally probably paid a kid to throw your product on your customer's lawn. If you're a marketing person, you valued media channels precisely because of that relationship. Now, Steve Jobs is coming along and saying, oh, hold on, we actually have the first and foremost relationship with these consumers. In fact, 125 million of them have entrusted us with their credit card information. And if you want to get in contact with this consumer through our iApp ecosystem, come through me, Steve Jobs. This is a very key thing to consider about the iPhone, the iTouch ecosystem, and why the iPad was launched. Next point I want to bring up, this is a thought from Ben Rosen, legendary technologist. He wrote this on his blog. Quote, "I've now had my iPad for 10 days. It does everything as advertised. It's a barrel fun to play with. But it turns out that my main use for the iPad is demoing the iPad." He's still waiting for a killer app for the iPad. And actually, if you have an iPad, it's great to pull the thing out and, show people, particularly the interactive encyclopedia. And it's like, oh, gee whiz, that's fantastic. But we're still waiting for people to figure out quite what to do with it. And we're seeing, at least in the States, Time Inc. putting out a $5 edition of Time magazine, and it looks great, but the idea that people are going to click to buy a $5 edition of a magazine on a weekly basis until subscription programs are rolled out, you can see that the old media is still grappling with how to deal with this thing that they've had, theoretically years of anticipation and since January to start to engineer. Next point I want to bring up, 3 out of 5 points. And by the way, these, if you're looking for links to some of these citations, you can send me an email at this address, sdumenco@adage.com, and I'll send you links to the original posts. And they're worth reading in depth. In particular, Alan Rusbridger from the Guardian Group in London, his point is that the iPad transforms your sense of scale. Now, this is pretty obvious. Obviously, it's a bigger form factor. But I'm going to quote from his essay, which I think nails it. Quote, "In the space of 4 days, my sense of scale has changed. On Tuesday, my new iPad seemed like a rather overblown iPhone. By Friday, I found myself irritated at trying to read emails or type on the iPhone, which already seems mean and cramped. A tabloid newspaper page seems exotically large. A broadsheet feels like street hoarding. The iPad just seems natural. Maybe Apple has simply rediscovered what book publishers, over the space of 400 years, came to a more or less settled view on, the right shape of page for what the human eye and hand feels easy with." And I think that's key. And certainly when I look at my little iPhone now, it seems like this pathetic, mean, cramped little device once you've consumed media on the iPad. I also think that very much the iPad is a 1.0 device. We think of it as sort of a blown-up iPhone or iTouch, but in fact, in this form factor, it's a significantly different media experience. And I think Apple's going to be playing around with different sizes that give it more portability. Certainly 1.5 pounds seems super light if you're not bringing your laptop, if you're bringing this instead. But it's still pretty heavy. I think that once we get below the 1 pound threshold and maybe a smaller screen size so it's a little bit more portable, then it potentially truly becomes a mass device rather than a geek kind of fantasy. The fourth point that I want to bring up, I think it's possible that the iPad might serve as the gateway to the post-scroll era. What I mean by this is that in the early days of the internet, when people still felt that they needed training wheels, when they needed to use a dial-up service, America Online or CompuServe, you would get pages that were sort of like very simplified magazine table of contents. So there'd be buttons and little blurbs and little descriptions. And it would be all there for you. And you didn't have to scroll down 10 miles to get to stuff as you do now in the post-blog era from 99, 2000 on. I'm going to show you real quickly. This is a beta version of Deadspin, which is a very popular sports blog based in the Gawker Media Group. Gets millions of unique visitors per month in the States. This is not live yet, I don't believe, but what's interesting, it's formatted for the iPad. So if you're on an iPad and you visit the Deadspin site, it takes you to this page as the default. And what's interesting is they're experimenting with moving away from this idea that you have to dive down to find stuff, and the whole sort of reverse chronology psychology that we've all gotten used to with the cumbersome blog sensibility. Everything's there, and you get back to this kind of old school mid-90s interactive design sensibility that's almost like CD-ROMs or AOL circa 94, 95 of, oh, here's the most important things. It's more curated. Here are some buttons to click on. You don't have to like go down and down and down. And I think that it's important to keep in mind that even though we're all used to this kind of endless homepage sensibility, it's been a disservice to not only readers but marketers and content sites. I think we're going to see a lot more of this because of now we have this new page, this new playground to experiment with. Last point I want to bring up relates to a column that I published in AdAge, which is titled, Why the iPad has Inspired Me to Give Up My Toaster, My Coffee Maker, and My Pants. I won't go into complete detail. Obviously, I've changed my mind on the pants front, but basically I was parroting the idea that there's a lot of technologists who are frustrated with the idea that the iPad is a closed ecosystem and you have to sort of mostly go through the App Store to really take advantage of the power of the device. So I was suggesting that it's extremely limiting to have only 2 limb ports for your pants, and I wish somebody would start with an open source pants movement, but I think it'll be a while before we see that. But I bring up this piece because somebody left a comment on the column, which I thought was very insightful. This is a quote from that reader comment. Quote, "The iPad reminds me of the Fender Stratocaster and the Gibson Les Paul. There were 6-string electric guitars before, but the sleek hardwood body, thin neck, and close action feel good when playing, and strong magnetic pickups increase the range of the instrument, including harmonic effects, sustained notes, crystal clear tones, and electronic distortion. The negative whiners," by which he means the iPad bashers, "are like the folkies who booed Bob Dylan when he went electric. If you can extend the range of a device, it makes it worth it to the people who will find a use for it." So we're still waiting for the people who will find a use for it. Steve Jobs is the Les Paul of tech. Who will be the Jimi Hendrix of tech? Very insightful insight from a reader. And I have a connected point here, which is Steve Jobs equals perhaps Bill Paley. This comes from a Wired magazine writer, Fred Fogelstein, who has this to say about the new generation of touchscreen devices. Quote, "The iPhone and probably the iPad," jury's out, "are the first devices that truly solve the fundamental problem of media convergence. We are just as happy to do email and web surf as to lean back and watch a video or a movie with a handheld touchscreen device. Devices like the iPad and the iPhone generate audience, which attract advertisers, a business which Apple is now in because of iAd, which attracts content. What's clear is that with each passing day, Steve Jobs is looking less and less like Sony's co-founder, Akio Morita, and more like CBS's Bill Paley, the man credited with inventing network television." Actually, in my white paper, I make the point, I sort of went beyond the Bill Paley metaphor and suggested that what you're really looking at with Apple now is something sort of unparalleled in the history of technology and media, which is that we're used to the idea of like General Electric having made some media devices, the television division, and then owning NBC Universal. But General Electric didn't want to grow up to be an advertising company. It didn't try to become Omnicom. And now with the iAd ecosystem, you have Steve Jobs saying that he wants to build the devices. He wants to control how the devices are built, because there's this whole kind of flash war and app authoring controversy going on with Apple. He wants to control the flow. He wants to control the 125 million credit cards that allow that media to get to the consumer. And then he wants a cut of the advertising revenue as well. So I think it's really interesting to contemplate Apple becoming kind of the new gorilla of not only consumer technology, but media and advertising. In fact, I think it's sort of the triple down sandwich of media and technology right now and advertising. They're trying to pack a lot into the Apple bottom line. Basically, that's it. We're going to have a little group discussion up here. I just wanted to say once again that if you'd like more links, send an email to sdumenco@adage.com, and I'll leave you with this final couple of thoughts from KFC and Apple. Unthink and think different. There you go. Thank you.